Let me tell you something. Bad interviews are really hard to listen to. In fact, you probably don't listen to very many or don't listen very long when it's clear that the person conducting the interview doesn't know what they're doing. Now, I can say that because I myself have conducted a lot of really bad podcast interviews. So in this video, I want to share some of the mistakes that I've made and the common mistakes I hear others making to help you know how not to conduct a podcast interview.
This is the place for podcasters.
Hey everybody, Brian here with Summit City Studios, and on this channel, we talk about tips, tools, and tech to help you create a better podcast. Today, I want to talk about the podcast interview because it's a skill, really it's an art form that takes some time to learn. You know, we watch news shows or we listen to podcasts or we see journalists conducting interviews and they are really good at it. But we have to recognize that those people that are on TV or professionally podcasting likely have been at it a long time and they've made mistakes along the way. They've had plenty of slip ups and probably have asked their fair share of really dumb questions along the way. So if you're new at it, you probably won't be great at it, at least not yet. Let's talk about some common mistakes that I see people make and that I've made myself when it comes to conducting a podcast interview. The first is being overly excited. Now, don't get me wrong. You should be excited to have your guests on your podcast, but there's a limit to how much excitement you should express. Let me show you. Man, I'm just really excited. It's so good to have you here. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here too. Really excited. You don't know how excited I am. It's such an honor and such a privilege to have you, of all people, on this podcast. I'm just really, really excited about it. Really excited. Now, I've done that a lot, especially early on in my podcasting career. But even now, sometimes when I have a guest on and it's really difficult maybe to know what question to ask next or how to get into the interview, that's when I start catching myself saying, I'm really excited. I'm so excited to have you here on the show. I'm glad that you're here. Man, this is really exciting, right? I use those words as fillers, and I hear other podcasters do those same things when they don't know how to transition to the next one. So try and catch yourself being overly excited, or at least saying repeatedly how excited you are to have your guests on the podcast. The second mistake then that I want to help you avoid is oversharing. Now, there's a time and a place to have good dialogue on a podcast where you're asking questions of your guests and you're responding with maybe a couple stories of your own, but there's a limit to how much sharing you as the host should do in a good podcast interview. Let's watch. That's really cool. Tell us what kind of things you were into growing up. Yeah, so I played baseball for a little bit. Baseball, yeah, I played baseball too. But I didn't play baseball for long, actually. I kind of gave it up when I was in elementary school and started playing soccer. And soccer was the thing that really stuck for me. I learned all kinds of things about life and friendships and relationships and being a good teammate from playing soccer. It was such a good experience for me. Here's why this is important. You see, you're the host of your podcast, and you have episode after episode after episode for your story to really unfold for your audience. But your guest probably only has one shot. So let them be the expert. You've asked them on your podcast for a reason. Ask them good questions and let them share. Now, again, have some good dialogue and respond with some stories of your own. But make sure you're highlighting your guest and their story and their expertise and what they have to share. The third mistake that I've made, I've heard other people make, and I want to help you avoid is not having much of a structure for the flow of your podcast. You know, sometimes we think we can just wing it and we jump into a conversation, and sometimes we can, but we have to recognize just because we happen to be enjoying a conversation that kind of bounces all over the place doesn't mean our audience is really going to enjoy that. So you're going to need a little bit of structure, because if you don't, it might sound something like this. And we were all standing in line, right? And that's when my daughter ordered herself a Big Mac. That's crazy, right? Right. So, okay, we've talked about your book, and we talked about the time you were sick, which
we have.
Gross. And we've talked about your daughter's food preferences. What else do you want to talk about? It's a good question. It's crazy, and I laugh because I've actually had podcasts that sound like that, where I and my guests kind of bounce all over the place. And it's fun. I enjoy those conversations, but just because I enjoy those conversations, and maybe you enjoy those kind of conversations where you and your guests are just laughing and having a good time and bouncing all over the place, doesn't mean it's going to keep your listeners engaged. So it's important to have it kind of mapped out. It doesn't have to be totally scripted, but it's important to at least have a journey kind of mapped out of questions you want to ask and how you're going to get there. This next mistake that I'm going to share is one that is actually really bad. And honestly, I hate to admit it, but I'm guilty of this one just as much as all the others. And that's not doing your research, not knowing who it is that you are interviewing, not knowing the work that they've done, not knowing anything about the content that they're going to be sharing. When you don't do your research, it can sound a little like this. So I think my listeners will be really excited to hear about all the cool stuff that you do. So what kind of cool stuff do you do? Well, I drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah,
I number one.
Coffee's good.
And I stare at the wall a lot. That's interesting. So, see, when you do your research, it not only helps you ask good questions and have a sense of knowledge about what you're talking about, it actually helps your guests feel loved and respected and listened to and heard because you have done your research. One of the ways I've gotten around this, and one of the things I've done since making some of these mistakes, is that I'll have a guest questionnaire that I'll send to guests that I interview on my show, and I'll have them fill it out. Even if it's a family member or a friend that I've known for a long time, I still have them fill out this guest questionnaire so that I know a little bit more. There might be some things in their story that I don't know, or that they might think is more important than some of the things that I was going to ask them. So I asked them to fill out a guest questionnaire, and that's one way that I can do a little bit more research on the people that I'm interviewing. And finally, let's talk about poor transitions. Transitions are incredibly key to move from one topic to another topic or one question to another question in the flow of the conversation. But I hear too many podcasters, again, guilty of this myself, that have no transitions, it's really abrupt, or really poor transitions to go from one topic to the next. Check this out. How a perfect stranger came along and rescued me and completely saved my life. That is a crazy story. Yeah. So let's move on. Tell me, what does your daughter like to eat? Bad transitions can really catch your guest off guard and prevent them from really sharing what it is that you invited them to come on your podcast to talk about in the first place. And probably worse than anything else is that it can throw your listeners for a loop and leave them confused about how you got from here to here in the conversation. And when listeners are confused, they're not going to stick around very long. So now you know how not to conduct a podcast interview, but have no fear. I've got another video that will not only help you avoid these mistakes, but will actually help you conduct a great podcast interview. I'll link it at the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one. If you're a new podcaster or a podcaster looking to level up your game, or maybe you're just looking for someone to help edit and produce the podcast that you're already recording, visit me at summitcitystudios.com to find out how I can help you create a great sounding podcast.